My name is Thomas. I'm 74 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I was once a husband, father, worker, and today I am an old man with a face that bothers me. Tell me something. Have you ever felt that your presence caused discomfort just by existing? Have you ever noticed someone looking away, not out of shyness, but out of repulsion? I felt it. And it wasn't from a stranger on the street. It was inside my house. Life has taught me to endure a lot. War, overdue bills, the death of the woman I loved for more than 40 years. But nothing prepared me to feel disgust coming from those who should call me family. The wound that appeared on my nose seemed small at first. A cut, maybe a pimple, but it did not heal. It grew, it ignited. The mirror started to scare me, but what really hurt, it was the silence of those who saw me. I'm not here to complain about life. I'm here to tell you how a wound became a sentence, and how, even though I was sick, I found the strength to stay on my feet. At the end of this video, you will understand why, even deformed, I was the only one there who maintained my dignity, because the truth always finds a way to appear. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. What I'm going to tell you is not just about physical pain or a wound that changed my face, but about how the cruelty of those who should love us can hurt more than any disease. On my granddaughter Emily's birthday, in front of dozens of guests, I was called to say a few words. Hesitated. Every breath hurt. My mouth burned, and shame suffocated me more than the deformation itself. But there was something in the air in that room. A quiet tension that announced that something would change forever, that the truth I had been carrying for months about to explode would finally be seen by everyone. And before continuing, I ask you to stay with me in this account. If you feel that this story touches any corner of your heart, leave your like, subscribe, and share this moment with me. It's not just a gesture of support for video. It is a gesture of empathy, of putting oneself for a few moments in the shoes of someone who suffered in silence and yet chose to smile. It is an invitation for you to accompany me on this journey, and together we can feel the weight and lightness of each word that is yet to come. I have always enjoyed the simple routine that my life has given me. Living in Asheville, North Carolina, was a quiet gift. Quiet streets, waving neighbors, and that garden I tended to as if it were part of myself. After the death of Margaret, my wife, everything seemed to have lost a little color, but the garden was still alive, blooming as if to remind me that I still had something to fight for. I would occupy myself with small repairs in the neighborhood, a creaking door, a broken chair, a jammed gate, and even in retirement, I felt purposeful. Michael, my oldest son, lived a few blocks away with his wife, Jessica, and granddaughter, Emily. The other children had already moved out of state, busy with their lives. I saw them from time to time, but my routine remained calm, almost meditated, until one day I noticed something strange in my nose. A small wound, which I tried to ignore, believing it to be just a razor cut or some scratch that I didn't remember receiving. In the first few days, I thought it was silly. I put ointment, washed it carefully, looked in the mirror trying to see only a small wound. But weeks passed, and the wound grew, became painful, and eventually began to fester. It wasn't just a small scar. It was as if my own body was warning me that something was wrong. Each time I looked in the mirror, I saw not only the deformity growing in my nose, but also a reflection of the silent changes that were beginning to happen around me. The people who used to greet me with a smile now looked away. Some even turned away when they met me in the bakery or the supermarket. I tried not to notice, but the sensation was inevitable. The marked body became a source of embarrassment for others. At first, I thought I was exaggerating. Maybe it was insecurity, maybe it was my own shame that amplified everything. But when I started noticing Jessica, my daughter-in-law, I realized that it wasn't just about my perception. She started acting differently with me. He avoided my gaze, looked away during dinner, and little excuses for not sitting next to me became constant. I saw the discomfort in the way she straightened her hair, fiddled with her cell phone, or cleaned the table as if she was in a hurry to move away. Every gesture cut me silently because it came from those I helped, from those I raised with affection, from those who should at least treat me with dignity. The wound on my nose gradually became a symbol of what I felt inside: pain and isolation. My face, which had always been just ordinary, now seemed to bring with it the rejection of what was once family. Every day, the weight increased. I started to feel observed differently. Looks became silent torture. On a visit to Michael and Jessica, I noticed the way Emily, my granddaughter, hesitated before hugging me, almost as if she felt her mother's discomfort in the air. That realization hurt me more than the wound itself. I spent nights reflecting on all this. I sat on my old sofa, watching the streetlight pass through the window, and thought, is it just my face that has changed? Or has the nature of the people around me also become deformed? It was at that moment that I realized that I could not run away, nor hide my pain. The sore in his nose was not just a medical problem. It was a mirror of what I had felt for months: the withdrawal, contempt, and indifference of those I loved. As the wound grew, my heart also bore silent scars. I remembered Sunday mornings when Emily would run up to me, hugging me with confidence and joy. Now she felt that each gesture of affection was loaded with hesitation, as if the purity of her love was being contained by her mother's discomfort. And I, even though I felt fragile and scarred, tried to smile. The smile was not just a facial expression. It was my armor, my way of resisting the weight of indifference. But there was a day that marked my spirit even more deeply. As I passed the corner of Main Street, I met an old friend, someone who had always respected me, someone who knew my life story. When he saw me up close, he took a step back, and I noticed the hesitation in his eyes. At that moment, I felt a twinge of intense sadness, but also a silent understanding. The world often reacts with fear to what it does not understand. My heart ached, but a small inner voice reminded me that dignity is not measured by the reaction of others. And it was in this reflection that I realized something universal. All of us, at some point in life, face situations in which we are judged by what is visible, superficial, but which does not define who we are. The body ages, the appearance changes, but the essence, the history, and the struggle remain intact. And if you are watching me and have felt it in any way, if you have ever experienced the feeling of being judged from the outside, I would like you to leave a comment with a short phrase, something like, "I believe, I have lived this, what strength," or "it touched me." I want to feel that you understand the silent weight that carries those who love and are still loved, even if sometimes no one notices. As I reflected on this, the bruise on my nose continued to grow, and with it, the tension in my own home. Every meal, every conversation, every visit turned into a silent test. I learned to speak little, to smile more, and to observe more. I realized that what defines our strength is not how the world treats us, but how we choose to react. My entire life, from my days as a woodworker until now, has always been about hard work, sacrifice, and love. And yet, the pain of being rejected by those who were supposed to protect and support me was a cruel but necessary lesson. And even with all this weight, there was a hope that refused to die. I knew that one day the truth would come out, that those who looked away, who pretended not to notice, would have to face the reality of my presence, of my history, of my silent love. And at that moment, between despair and patience, I realized that something was about to change. Something that would require courage, that would test the dignity of everyone around me, and that would put me in front of a moment I could never avoid. But it was not yet time to reveal what would happen. What was to come would transform not only my relationship with Jessica, but the entire dynamic of my family. And I wondered, with a mixture of fear and determination, would everyone be prepared to hear the truth that I had carried in silence for so long? The answer I didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. No one imagined that that wound, small at first, would be able to change everything. And as I looked at the reflection of my own face in the mirror, I felt that the next meeting, the next moment, would be decisive. Anyone who thought my presence was a burden would still discover that a man's strength is not measured by appearance, but by the courage to smile silently when everyone expects you to give up. And so, with a heavy heart and a suppressed breath, I held tight to the scarf that covered my nose and thought, something is about to happen, something that will make everyone see not only the deformity of my face, but the integrity of my soul. And I knew that when that moment came, there would be no turning back, only the truth, naked, clear, and impossible to ignore. I never imagined I'd feel so cold indoors, even on the hottest days of Asheville summer. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, had always been courteous, but suddenly the politeness turned to coldness. Every gesture, every word, had a calculated distance, as if I were a decorative figure instead of someone in the family. She avoided my gaze during meals, served dinner with tense hands and quick movements, as if she were in a hurry to get rid of my presence. I sat at the table, trying not to show the embarrassment, but I couldn't help but notice the way the food seemed to be placed in a hurry, the cutlery mechanically arranged, and the heavy silence that filled the air. One afternoon at lunch, she said with a tense smile, "Maybe Daddy Thomas should eat on the porch." He claimed it was because of the strong smell of the ointment, but I knew the truth. My face was beginning to generate discomfort. My own appearance had become a reason for rejection. As I tried to chew slowly, taking in the slightest glance, I heard Sam, my youngest grandson, only 4 years old, look at me with that pure curiosity that only children have and ask, "Grandpa, why is your nose melting?" That innocent question hit me like a sharp blade. Shame filled me, a mixture of embarrassment and sadness that made me wish to disappear, as if I could evaporate and become invisible. But even so, he smiles. He always smiles. My smile was not out of joy, but an armor against the weight of silent judgment that hung over me. I felt my hands tremble slightly, grabbed the towel, and took a deep breath, remembering Margaret's words. "Thomas, even when the world ignores you, hold your head high." The silence in that room was almost palpable. Jessica continued to pour the drinks, adjusting the dishes, and every little movement of her seemed to scream that I didn't belong there. I observed, recorded every gesture, every sigh, every quick look that passed by me without staring. The truth is that no one needed to say cruel words. Indifference, when well directed, can be more painful than any direct offense. And at that moment, I realized that I was learning to measure my own strength, not by the way they treated me, but by the way I chose to react. Michael, my son, seemed to notice the mood, but he didn't say anything. I looked at my mother, averted my eyes from me, and tried to cut the tension with neutral comments about work or time. But I knew that Jessica's coldness outweighed any complicit silence. Each meal became a silent battlefield, where I struggled to keep my dignity intact, while hostility lurked under the veil of politeness. I also began to observe Emily, the eldest granddaughter, who tried to disguise her strangeness, but could not help but small expressions of discomfort. She looked at me sideways, tilted her head, held her mother's arm as if seeking protection. That hurt more than the wound itself. I realized that Jessica's rejection didn't just affect me. His attitude was beginning to shape my granddaughter's perception of who I was, and it terrified me. I didn't want Emily to associate my face with disgust or shame. Still, I kept smiling. Smiling became an act of resistance, a silent reminder to myself that no matter how hard they tried to diminish me, my dignity remained. I knew that behind every uncomfortable look there was an opportunity to show strength and patience. It was my way of fighting without raising my voice, of confronting cruelty with serenity. Each smile was a reminder that I wouldn't give in to humiliation, even if my appearance made everyone forget for a moment who I really was. That afternoon, I felt the need to reflect on the fragility of people in the face of what they do not understand. A sick body, a different appearance, and suddenly, those who used to smile easily move away, as if the mere fact of existing could bother them. And then I stopped for a moment, watching the scene carefully, and thought, maybe many of you have also felt this, that feeling of being invisible or judged only by what the world sees and not by what we are inside. If you've ever been through something similar, I'd like you to comment with a short phrase. I believe, I've lived it, what strength, it touched me, or it's true. It is a simple gesture, but it helps to feel that we are not alone in what hurts the most. As I digested these feelings, I realized that the tension wasn't just in the air, it was solidifying into increasingly clear actions. Jessica began to move away from me in small talk, as if every word I said could contaminate the environment. The youngest child, Sam, kept looking at me curiously, and I had to balance my own shame with the desire to maintain my bond with him. Every smile, every word spoken carefully, was an attempt to rebuild the normality that had already been broken. And then came the comment I'll never forget. Jessica, trying to get away discreetly, said to a friend in a low voice, but audible enough for me to hear, "I can't live with this. It's too much for me." The sentence crossed the room like a biting wind. Everyone stopped for a moment. Some faces turned to me, others looked at her, and that moment was etched in my memory as the first time I realized that rejection was not just a reflection of appearance, but a reflection of the soul. My heart beat faster, but I kept smiling. I kept breathing. I continued to exist, even if for some I was already just a nuisance. And as the afternoon turned into a late afternoon, with the soft light streaming through the curtains, I realized that this would be just the beginning of a series of silent challenges. The wound on my nose was still there, more and more evident, more and more painful, but there was something inside me that refused to budge. I knew that the situation would not remain like this forever, that the truth I had been carrying in silence would begin to reveal itself. And a question began to form in my mind, unsettling and persistent. When would the time come when everyone would see not only my deformed face, but also the strength and dignity I kept intact inside? Because I felt, in that instant, that something about to happen would forever change the perception of who I really was, and I needed to be prepared for that. In the days that followed, I began to write everything down in an old spiral notebook that I kept in my desk drawer. Each page was an attempt to put out what my body and soul carried in silence. I wrote about the physical pain, which seemed to have no end, the secretion that insisted on flowing, the odor that embarrassed me, the internal itch that transformed each breath into a constant reminder of my fragility. But the deepest pain was the moral one, the one that came from silence and withdrawal. Family dinners became a test of patience. Empty chairs around me, murmured conversations, averted glances. Even the invitations that were once constant began to disappear, and the feeling of being a burden set in, silent and persistent. My daughter in Seattle hadn't visited me in 2 years. He called sporadically, but his words seemed more like an obligation than a gesture of affection. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, took control of the house in a subtle but firm way. She set the times, decided the days, and even limited my presence on weekends, claiming family routine and small excuses that hid the real reason. My appearance, my deformed nose, had become an argument to move away. Her every gesture seemed carefully calculated to exclude me, to show me that my presence had become a nuisance. And even so, I remained silent, recording everything in my notebook, observing every detail, taking a deep breath and keeping my smile, even if it was just for me. The situation began to affect the eldest granddaughter, Emily. Once so affectionate, she now looked at me with some hesitation, tilted her head, held her mother's hand, and seemed to measure every gesture she made. I felt my heart tighten, because I realized that my emotional absence or any inattention from the family was also contaminating her innocence. My body, the sore in my nose, seemed to have turned my existence into a justification of discomfort, a silent argument for exclusion. I, who had always been present, who helped, taught, and loved without measure, now saw myself reduced to a burden, a problem to be avoided. Writing in the notebook became my therapy. Each line was an outburst, each written word was a small form of resistance. I remembered the times when Margaret smiled at me, when she said that my face didn't matter, because who I was inside was worth more than any appearance. And then, in that quiet solitude, I realized that I needed something more than words. I needed to prepare myself for the moment when the truth would be inescapable, when my dignity would need to assert itself even before those who despised me. During these weeks, my gaze became more attentive, more observant. Jessica's every gesture, every forced smile, every subtle comment on my nose, everything was recorded in detail. I realized that her coldness was not just a lack of affection, but a way of exerting control, of trying to turn my pain into public shame. But behind all the sadness, I felt something different growing inside me, the conviction that I would keep my dignity intact, that the truth sooner or later would reveal itself clearly and inevitably. As I wrote down my memories and thoughts, I began to notice patterns. Jessica didn't react the same way to Michael or Emily, only to me. It showed me that rejection was personal, directed, and not just a reflection of illness or appearance. The realization gave me clarity and, in a way, courage. I needed to resist, to remain present and patient. Smiling, even when I wanted to scream, was my way of maintaining control. It was my way of protecting my heart, my essence, and above all, the innocence of Emily, who still saw her grandfather as someone with integrity, even though the world around her tried to teach her otherwise. On silent nights, sitting on the porch of his house, watching the streetlights and listening to the wind sway the leaves of the trees, he reflected on all that he had lost and all that he could still gain. Each entry in the notebook turned into a form of silent resistance, a reminder that I didn't need anyone's approval to remain worthy. The physical pain would remain, but my inner strength would not be shaken. I could endure the discomfort of others. I could smile silently and still set the stage for a moment when my presence, my history, and my dignity would finally be recognized. And it is at this point that I often found myself thinking, how many times in our lives do we stop valuing ourselves because the world around us rejects us? How many times have we allowed indifference to turn into silent shame, not realizing that strength lies not in beating others, but in standing firm when everyone expects you to fall apart? If you have ever felt this sensation of being reduced to a burden, I would like you to comment on something simple, a word or phrase that shows that you understand me. I have lived this, I believe. What strength, or it touched me. This small gesture creates a connection that goes beyond the screen and reminds me that we are not alone in the fight against invisibility and indifference. But as I wrote everything down, I realized that history was about to change. Something was approaching, a quiet opportunity for a turnaround which would require courage and patience. The day when my presence would finally be acknowledged, and when those who looked away would have to face the truth, was coming. I didn't know how yet, but I could feel in the air that the family dynamics, Jessica's coldness, and even the estrangement of the eldest daughter from Seattle would begin to confront the reality of what I represented. Love, dedication, and dignity intact. And it was at that moment, holding the pen in the notebook and looking at the wound in the mirror, that a strange sensation set in. A mixture of anxiety and determination took over me, as if each page written had planted a seed of transformation. I knew that soon there would be a moment when every word, every gesture, and every silence would fall into place, revealing the truth that no one dared to face. But the question that kept coming out of my head was unsettling. Would everyone be prepared to face what I had been carrying in silence for so long? And I felt ready, even though I didn't know exactly how the scene would unfold, because somehow something inside me said that that wound, small and painful, would still be the catalyst for a truth that would change everything. When the Navy veteran neighbor insisted that I go to the community clinic, I confess that I hesitated. I'm not a doctor, man. I've never been one to complain. And I've always thought that small wounds resolve themselves. But that cut on my nose was no longer small, and the awareness that something was wrong pushed me into the clinic. The smell of alcohol and new gloves mingled with the silent cold of the waiting rooms. The doctor, a man with a firm voice and a straight gaze, examined my wound and bluntly said, "It could be a skin carcinoma. We need to investigate." He scheduled the exams and explained the severity. Maybe it was too late for a treatment that would restore the aesthetics of my face, but there was a chance to prevent something worse from setting in. I came home with that heavy envelope in my pocket, my heart tight, and no one to hold my hand or ask if I was okay. Michael was away at work, and Jessica, my daughter-in-law, limited herself to a cold, almost mechanical comment. "Oh, I hope it's not contagious." There was no hug, there was no look of understanding, just that cutting silence that seemed to fill the whole house. I went into the back room, closed the door carefully, and sat down at the desk. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, and the feeling of loneliness hit me in a way that even physical pain couldn't. I took my spiral notebook, the one that already held my days of silent pain, and started writing. Every word was a silent scream. The pain in my nose, the smell, the itching, all of it was just part of what I carried. I wrote, "Today I discovered that the disease in the face is less than the disease in the eyes of my family." I felt that sentence, simple, reflected all the bitterness I had been harboring for months. The wound was visible, painful, and impossible to ignore. But what hurt me the most was realizing that the people who were supposed to love me treated me as if I were a burden, an inconvenient presence. As I wrote, my mind went back to the past moments. I remembered Margaret, my wife, smiling at the sight of me, regardless of any scratch or sign of age. I remembered Sundays with Emily running up to me, hugging me with all the purity of childhood and the sense of belonging that once filled every corner of my life. Now that feeling of abandonment was palpable, and Jessica's every gesture seemed only to reinforce my isolation. Still, I felt a strange clarity. The physical pain, though intense, had no power over my dignity. It was the family's behavior that tested my patience and my ability to hold my head high. And as I wrote, I realized something essential. True strength does not come from fighting others, but from standing up to indifference. I could suffer, I could feel ashamed, but I could never let their contempt break me. And it was at that moment, sitting there, with the soft light coming in through the bedroom window, that I thought of you, who are listening to me now. I'm here, opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you. Because just as you hear me, we all need someone who understands, who validates our silent pain, even if it's just a simple gesture, a click, a comment saying, "I understand you." In the days following the diagnosis, I realized that every look inside the house had changed. Jessica, with her cold demeanor, seemed to measure every step I took, as if my simple breathing could bother me. Every meal, every conversation became a reminder that the presence of an old man, scarred by illness and experiences, could be treated as a problem to be avoided. Michael was absent, and that only added to the sense of vulnerability. But even so, I didn't give up. I kept my smile, wrote, took a deep breath, and prepared my mind for the moment when the truth would have to come out, when I would no longer depend on the understanding of those who refused to see. As I watched my reflection in the mirror, the deformity in my nose reminded me of all the battles I had ever faced. Not only the external ones, but the internal, silent ones, the ones that no one sees. The wound was real, visible, but there was something deeper, invisible, that I needed to protect: my dignity, my memory, my ability to remain whole. And I realized that Jessica's silence and Michael's absence would not be eternal. There was something about to change, something that would require patience and courage, something that would test the strength of everyone in the room, not just mine. And even with all the weight in my heart, something inside me turned on a light. The certainty that my story still had unwritten chapters, that every entry in the notebook, every thought kept, every smile kept silent, would be a preparation for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed. I didn't know when or exactly how, but I could feel that a turning point was coming. One of those turns that transform the whole perception, that makes the eyes that previously judged with contempt have to face something bigger, something they cannot ignore. And then, sitting there, pen still in hand, I took a deep breath and thought, soon all those who despise me for my appearance will have to face the reality of who I really am. The question that hung in the air was unsettling. Are they ready to face the truth? And I felt silently and surely that when that moment came, no one would come out unscathed. Something was about to happen, and I would need to be ready for every gesture, every word, and every look that came along. Because in the end, the wound on my face was just the introduction of something much bigger, something that no one could ignore anymore. I sat in front of the bathroom mirror, the same mirror that Margaret used to clean so carefully, and stared at my own reflection. The sore on my nose had grown larger than I could have imagined, a jagged crust that seemed to have no end, and the handkerchief I used to hold the pus was now stained and gave off an odor I tried to ignore. But more than the physical appearance, it was the weight of the gaze of others that silently corroded me. It was at that moment that the memory brought me Margaret with all the strength of nostalgia. I remember her caressing my face, looking me in the eyes and saying, in that soft voice that still echoes in my mind, "You are the most handsome man in the world." I remember the security I felt in that statement, the certainty that, regardless of any imperfection, I was loved, valued, important. Today, in front of the mirror, this memory cut me deep, because everything that was once care and affection seemed to have turned to dust, as if memories were the last vestiges of a world that no longer existed. As my fingers ran over the aching crust, I felt a surge of melancholy that brought me back to the days when we built our house, brick by brick, with effort and hope. I remembered the cold winter mornings, carrying wet wood, measuring every inch of the floor, nailing and sanding with the care of someone who builds not only a house, but a home for the family he loved so much. I relived the birth of my children, the smell of the hospital, the crying of the first night, the feeling of responsibility mixed with joy. Each memory was a silent reminder of how much I had given of myself, how much I had invested in love, effort, and dedication. And now, as I watched the reflection of my deformed face, I realized that all this dedication seemed invisible to those I loved most. I turned my attention to the first cabinet I sculpted, still in my youth, a simple but carefully made piece of furniture designed to last generations. I remembered the afternoons when Margaret would sit next to my countertop, encouraging me to finish every detail, and the pride we felt when we saw our house filled with furniture made with our own hands. All this, which was once a reason for joy and pride, now mixed with the feeling of loss. I was alone in front of a mirror, observing not only the physical wound, but the emotional distance that had been created between me and the family, and feeling that everything we had built together could be forgotten, ignored, lost. And even with all this melancholy, there was a flame inside me that wouldn't go out. I remembered that Margaret always said that a man's strength is not only in his muscles or appearance, but in his ability to remain whole and true, even in the face of the greatest adversity. And it was with this memory that I took a deep breath and began to reflect on the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. The sore in your nose hurt, of course, but the real wound was feeling invisible, feeling rejected by those who were supposed to protect and value you. And at the same time, I realized that even in the face of so much injustice, there was something inside me that remained intact. The dignity, the memory, and the truth of what I did, how much I loved, how much I tried. As I watched every line of my disease-scarred face, I began to remember small moments that were key to understanding who I was and what I represented. I remembered my granddaughter Emily's smile when I taught her how to build small wooden boxes, the laughter that filled the room on Sundays, the aroma of the cake that Margaret always prepared with affection while I took care of the garden. All of these memories enveloped me like a warm blanket on cold nights, reminding me that despite all the discomfort and rejection I was feeling right now, I hadn't lost what really mattered: my story, my love, and my integrity. However, an unsettling feeling persisted. I knew that I could not remain forever in the silence of memory. The wound on my nose was just an outward reflection of something much bigger: the need to be seen, to have my worth recognized, to confront in some way the indifference and coldness that was beginning to shape my family dynamic. And it was at that moment that I realized that it was not enough just to survive rejection. I needed to prepare myself for the moment when the truth would reveal itself, when the realization of who I really was could no longer be ignored. As I held the pen over the notebook, I began to write again. Each word was a bridge between the past and the present, between the silent pain and the hope that something would change. I remembered the times when Margaret said, "Thomas, you will go through storms, but never let them extinguish the light that exists within you." These words, which once seemed like simple advice, now echoed with force, reminding me that my ability to resist would be the key to the next stage of my life, when the truth about my dedication and worthiness would finally need to be acknowledged by those who tried to diminish me. As I wrote, I realized that every detail I remembered, every gesture of love, every sacrifice, every smile shared, was a quiet preparation for the coming turn. I could feel that something was about to happen, something that would require courage and patience, but that would forever change the family's perception of me. Memory became my refuge, but also my guide, showing me that despite all the pain, I still had a role to play, an opportunity to transform silence and indifference into recognition and justice, without raising my voice, without humiliating anyone, just being true to my story. And as I looked at the reflection of my face marked in the mirror, I felt that the moment to act, to make yourself noticed in a way that no one expected, was approaching. But there were still mysteries. There was still a tension in the air, an expectation that hung over the days to come. I knew that the wound in my nose and Jessica's indifference would not be eternal. Something was about to change. And as I put the notebook away and took a deep breath, a question began to form in my mind. When would the time come when everyone would see not only my deformed face, but also the truth of my dignity, the strength of my silent love, and the integrity that remained intact despite everything? Because I felt with every fiber of my being that this moment was near, and that nothing would be the same as before when it finally came. Emily's birthday was approaching, and I felt a mixture of joy and apprehension that I couldn't control. Jessica, as always, made it clear that she would rather I didn't go. "The house will be full. The noise may be annoying," she said, trying to sound polite, but the coldness was impossible to disguise. "Maybe you can send a card, Grandpa." A card? That squeezed my heart. For a moment, I thought about giving up, hiding from the world, protecting my face and my dignity at the same time. But then the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice, clear and innocent, crossed the line and brought me back to life. "Grandpa, I want you to come." That simple request dissolved all the doubts I had. I spent hours preparing. I tried to hide what I could with an elegant handkerchief. I put on perfume to disguise the odor that embarrassed me. I shaved with difficulty because each gesture seemed painful. The tumor pulsed, bled, and burned, and the cloth over my nose quickly darkened with discharge. But even so, I decided to go, for his granddaughter, for the last thread of bond I had left. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. Every wrinkle, every scar, every imperfection was a reminder of everything I went through, but also of my silent strength. As I walked through the door, carrying the stained handkerchief and heavy heart, I thought of all the times life had taught me to persist, to smile even when everything around me seemed to fall apart. I remembered Margaret, how she said that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it, and that's exactly what I needed to do now. Emily was waiting for me across the street, her smile lighting up all the way, and for a moment, everything seemed bearable. What Jessica thought or said was secondary to that hug that I knew would come. In the car, I felt the weight of expectation. With each kilometer traveled, my breathing became more difficult, my nose burned, and my heart beat hard. But there was something different about that day, a sense that something important was about to happen, something that couldn't be contained by masks, scarves, or forced smiles. And at that moment I thought, if you've been watching this far, stay with me, because what's going to happen at this party is going to change everything. It's one of those moments that you don't forget, that leaves marks on the soul, not on the face. When I arrived, I saw that the house was really full. Family, neighbors, friends from Emily's school, all present. My every step seemed to attract glances, some curious, some deviant, and I felt the silence of expectation hanging in the air. Emily ran up to me, hugged me tightly and said, "I'm glad you're here, Grandpa." And in that embrace, I felt a mixture of love, relief, and sadness. Love, because there was still something pure between us. Relief, because that gesture validated my presence. And sadness, because I knew that for many there, I was still just the man with the deformed nose, a burden to be ignored. As I tried to settle in, Jessica watched me from a distance. The expression on her face was barely noticeable, but I knew her well. There was contempt, shame, and a visible effort not to show the obvious. She mumbled something to a friend, but loud enough for me to hear. "It's impossible to live with this. This man is disgusting." The phrase crossed the environment like a cold blade, but I didn't back down. I kept smiling, sitting carefully, maintaining the poise and serenity I had cultivated for years. My body burned, my nose hurt, but there was something inside me that remained intact. My dignity, my patience, my silent strength. As I looked at Emily, who didn't care about the deformity of my face, I realized the dimension of what was about to happen. I wasn't just going to survive Jessica's rejection, I was going to show, without having to shout or humiliate anyone, that my presence had value. The truth I had carried silently for months, every little injustice, every cold gesture, every refusal, was about to confront the reality of who I really was. And then I realized something that gave me the courage to keep going. The real power was not in hiding the pain, but in facing it in front of everyone. I could feel the tension in the room rising, stares crossing, and something inside Jessica starting to waver, even as she tried to disguise it. And as my heart pounded, I thought of everyone who had ever suffered in silence, who had been ignored or diminished. And I felt a deep need to keep going, to resist, to let the truth emerge, in a way that no one expected. The afternoon wind blew across the porch and I could hear laughter, conversation, and the sound of the cake being cut. Emily held my hand, and that simple, pure connection gave me the strength to stand my ground. I took a deep breath and thought, everything I had endured so far, the deformed nose, the pain, the contempt, was just the prelude to something bigger. Something that would show, clearly and inevitably, that a man's dignity is not measured by appearance, but by the courage to remain upright even when everyone expects him to give up. And as the perfume I had passed mixed with the aroma of the cake and the murmur of conversations, I felt that the decisive moment was near. There was an energy in the air, a quiet tension that announced that the truth about to emerge could no longer be ignored. And I, sitting there with my stained handkerchief, my body tired and my heart heavy, knew that every smile, every gesture, every detail of the months of silent suffering prepared me for something that would change everything. I then asked myself, with a racing heart and a silent certainty, would everyone be prepared to face what I had carried in silence for so long? Because I felt, with every fiber of my being, that the moment that would define the perception of Jessica, Michael, and even the other guests was about to arrive. And when it arrived, no one would leave the same way. That day, that party, promised to be more than a celebration. It would be the moment when the truth would be revealed, and I needed to be ready for what would come next. I walked through the side door of the ballroom in Asheville and immediately felt all the eyes on me. Family, school friends, neighbors, all present, some standing up discreetly, others whispering among themselves, as if my mere presence was an event to be analyzed. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, saw me and took 2 steps back, turning to a friend and whispering in that contemptuous voice, "My God, how come they let him go out like that?" The phrase made its way through the hall, echoing in a way that made my heart tighten. A distant aunt, who had always treated me with affection, was in shock, and the silence that followed seemed to weigh more than any cruel remark. I took a deep breath and decided not to react, pretended not to hear, and settled in the back of the room, trying to occupy as little space as possible. The smell emanating from the tumor in my nose, no matter how hard I had tried to contain it, was noticeable, and I noticed a few gestures of revulsion here and there. A group of teenagers whispered and laughed softly, and I felt a pang of shame, mixed with the familiar sense of isolation I had been carrying for months. For a few seconds, I felt like a freak, someone who shouldn't be there, someone whose presence seemed to only bother me. But then, Emily, my granddaughter, ran up to me with that genuine smile that only children can give. He hugged me tightly and said, "Grandpa, I'm glad you came." That hug, simple but full of love, brought a wave of relief and hope. I felt my heart warm and realized that as much as some looks were full of judgment and repulsion, there were still those who saw me for what I really am. And in that moment, I realized a truth that anyone can understand. The opinion of others can hurt us. It can make us feel invisible, but true love, even if small or unexpected, has the power to restore us. If you've been through something similar, felt diminished or rejected, and found a simple gesture of affection that gave you the strength to continue, leave a comment with a short phrase such as, "I know how it is," "I understand you," "It's true," or "I agree." Knowing that someone understands what we are feeling gives us the courage to move forward. As I settled in, still hugging Emily, I realized that every step taken so far, every smile kept silent, every tear contained in the previous months, was preparing me for this moment. The contrast between the contempt of some and the purity of my granddaughter's innocence was stark, and at the same time profoundly revealing. I understood that the real struggle was not with the world, but with how we choose to respond in the face of injustice. And in that crowded room, I felt that something was about to happen that could not be contained by forced smiles or gestures of disgust. The truth I was silently carrying was about to reveal itself. The environment was still charged. Some tried to disguise their strangeness, others simply looked away, but I kept my posture and my serene smile. Emily held my hand, as if to say wordlessly that she was by my side, that she still saw me, that my presence mattered. And it was at that moment that I realized all those months of silent pain, every crooked look, every cold comment, every gesture of indifference, were about to have a consequence. Something that would show that a man's strength is not only measured by appearance, but by the courage to remain upright and dignified when everyone expects you to give up. As I observed every detail of the room, I felt that the decisive moment was approaching. Jessica's every gesture, every look of curiosity or disgust, every silent whisper was a reminder that the truth I had been carrying for months could no longer be ignored. And I knew that when the time came to speak, when my words finally reached everyone present, everyone's perception would change irrevocably. And in that instant, as Emily still hugged me and I held her steady hand, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The party, which until then seemed just an ordinary event, was turning into the stage for something bigger, something that would require courage, patience, and dignity. I knew that what was about to happen would not be forgotten, and that the perception of Jessica and everyone present would change forever. And then I asked myself, with my heart racing and my mind alert, are you all prepared to face the truth that I have carried in silence for so many months? Because I felt with every fiber of my being that the decisive moment was coming, and that when it came, no one would leave the same way they entered. And as the aroma of the cake mixed with the tension in the air, I realized that this would be just the beginning of a sequence of revelations that would transform not only the perception of my daughter-in-law, but of the entire family. When the master of ceremonies called the family members to say a few words to Emily, my heart almost stopped. Each speech before mine seemed to occupy the room with lightness, short stories, joyful memories. Jessica spoke first, her voice cold, rehearsed, memorized. Her every word sounded like a ritual, but without emotion, without warmth. I listened attentively, sitting there, feeling the weight of indifference hanging like a dense cloud over the table. Emily's maternal grandfather spoke soon after, full of emotion, and the room was filled with tender looks. When my name was called, absolute silence fell over the hall. Emily looked at me with eyes that begged, and at that moment any weakness of mine would have no room. I tried to refuse, whispering, "I don't know if I can," but she held my hand firmly and said, "Please, Grandpa." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my tired body and sore nose. Each step seemed to carry not only my body, but all the months of silent pain, rejection, and contempt I had endured. The whole room was watching me, some with curiosity, others with discomfort, but I needed to speak. My mouth hurt. Every word seemed to tear my throat, and for a few seconds I stood still, taking a deep breath, searching for the courage that would allow me to continue. Then I began, in a low but firm voice, "I don't have a pretty face anymore, but I have a story." And in that simple sentence, the whole weight of my life condensed. I started telling about my trajectory, about the days when I worked hard, getting up early, carrying wood, building our house brick by brick, making sure the family had a safe roof. I talked about Margaret, my wife, and how together we created not only children, but values, memories, and roots that would sustain everyone, even without them realizing it at that moment. Each word carried not only memories, but dignity. I spoke of the kindness I tried to maintain, even when no one thanked me, and the silent love I gave, even though I was treated as a burden. As I spoke, I felt the gazes change. Some no longer looked at my deformed nose, but at the expression of the man in front of them, one who had endured pain and humiliation without ever yielding to injustice. I talked about the sacrifices I made, about the Sundays without rest, about the nights when I took care of everyone, even tired, even sick. And then, stronger than any comment or gesture, he said, "I didn't come here for myself. I came because Emily's love still makes me feel alive." The sentence cut through the air. I felt the tension in the room turn into absolute silence, as if each person present was absorbing every word, confronting it with what they had seen and felt over the past few months. Jessica's expression changed. For the first time, I saw surprise and discomfort mingle in his eyes. There was no escape. There was no turning back. My story, my dignity, my silent suffering were in front of everyone, irrefutable, visible even without screaming. As I spoke, I thought of all the times I wondered if anyone would remember what I had done for this family, if anyone would notice the difference between a deformed face and a whole soul. And there, in that instant, I realized that the truth had a silent power that nothing could interrupt. Every cold gesture, every look of contempt, every whispered comment was being confronted with my story and my dignity, and I felt a wave of relief mixed with a quiet expectation. The consequence of all this was yet to come, and I was ready for it. When he finished speaking, some people could not hold back their tears. Others remained silent, looking at me with a mixture of respect and belated recognition. Emily squeezed my hand even tighter, and in that gesture, I felt that all the months of silent pain, all the nights I wrote in my notebook, all the times I kept the smile even when my heart was broken, had found meaning. But there was still something in the air, something I knew wasn't over. As I retreated to my seat, I realized that Jessica's looks were not only of discomfort, but of tension, of surprise, of a weight she didn't expect to carry. I could feel that the decisive moment was not yet over, that the silent justice that had been quietly preparing itself would begin to take shape. The feeling that something big was about to happen grew inside me, mixing relief and anxiety. And as I watched every detail of the room, the face of each guest, Jessica's posture, and the reaction of my son, Michael, a question began to form in my mind. Would everyone be prepared to face the next chapter of this story? Because I felt that the sequence of what had begun to unfold in that speech would have inevitable consequences, and that every glance I had previously looked away would now have to face the truth head-on. And even with my heart racing and my body tired, I knew there was no turning back. What was about to happen would change everyone's perception, and perhaps forever alter the place I occupied in that family. While the silence still hung, I felt that Emily, by my side, understood more than any words could express. Her hug, firm and warm, said that she saw me, that she recognized me, that my value was not in appearance, but in essence. And it was at that moment, observing people's reactions, feeling the tension that was beginning to break, that I realized that the turning point I had been waiting for had finally begun. But the big revelation, the one that would transform not just looks, but hearts and decisions, was yet to come, about to manifest itself in a way that no one in that room could ignore. I returned to my chair without waiting for applause, feeling my heart still racing for what I'd just said. The hall remained silent, and every look seemed to weigh on me like a silent sentence. It was then that I noticed, in the opposite corner, a man who stood up calmly. It was Mr. Charles Whitmore, a retired lawyer and long-time friend, someone who knew my story better than most. He approached with firm but calm steps and asked for the floor. All those present were astonished by the unexpected intervention. Some leaned forward, curious, others exchanged glances, trying to understand what would come next. Charles began to speak, and his voice filled the room clearly and firmly. He recounted bluntly how I had been quietly organizing my paperwork, planning every detail of my grandchildren's future, ensuring that home, education, and family values were preserved, even if my presence was constantly ignored or belittled. She explained that despite the physical pain and silent humiliation I faced, my only goal had always been to protect the family, maintain dignity, and ensure a secure future for Emily and the other grandchildren. His every word reinforced everything I tried to do in silence, every gesture that no one noticed, every night I spent writing in my notebook or reflecting on the injustice that surrounded me. Then he paused, looking directly at Jessica. The room became even quieter. I felt the tension build as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next sentence, and he said with firmness and conviction, "But I cannot ignore the humiliations he endured in silence. Today I saw it with my own eyes." The sentence cut through the air, more powerful than any gesture or argument I could have used. It was the public recognition of all the months I kept my silence, of all the times I smiled despite the shame and pain. As I watched the reaction of the people around me, I noticed something that brought me a mixture of relief and strength. Some family members began to move in their chairs, others exchanged looks of surprise and respect. Jessica, however, remained motionless, as if the lawyer's word had struck something inside her that she could no longer hide or deny. It was as if a lens of truth had been placed over the whole situation, revealing not only the reality of my pain, but also how much my presence had been underestimated and undervalued. And at that moment, I felt a deep need to connect with those who were watching me, to share the strength that small, silent victory brought me. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward, Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. For sometimes even the silence of an old man can be heard and understood, and that understanding can engender courage to face similar moments. As Charles continued to talk, recounting details that only someone very close to him could know, about every gesture of care, every night awake, every decision made to protect his grandchildren, I realized that something inside me was changing. There was a silent lightness, a certainty that justice, the one that does not scream or demand revenge, was beginning to materialize before everyone's eyes. His every word was like turning on a light that illuminated not only my suffering, but also the courage I had carried for months. The whole room seemed to be divided. Some looks still carried surprise, others respect, and a few tried to maintain the pose of indifference. But I knew that nothing could erase what had just been said. It was proof that my silence had not been in vain, that my patience and dignity were finally being recognized. And as I watched each gesture, I realized that the true power of that moment was not in me, but in the combination of everything that had been done with silent but firm intention over the years. My heart began to beat differently when I realized that Michael, my son, was beginning to react in ways that could no longer be contained. He looked at his mother, he looked at his lawyer, and finally he looked at me with eyes full of understanding and regret. I felt that the story I had been carrying for so long was about to reach a tipping point, something that would transform not only Jessica's perception, but the dynamics of the entire family. And as Charles finished his account, making it clear that all I had endured in silence was now recorded before everyone, I felt a mixture of anxiety and relief. Every look, every gesture, every silence contained in the hall became a bridge to the next phase, to the moment when my words and my story would finally have tangible consequences. I realized that the patience I'd cultivated for months was about to turn into something visible, impossible to ignore. And then I found myself thinking, when would the moment come when everyone, not just Jessica, would have to face the truth of what I had endured in silence? When would the dignity that I kept intact for months begin to influence not only looks, but attitudes, decisions, and feelings? I knew that moment was approaching, that something bigger was about to unfold, and that the patience and courage I had maintained so far would be crucial to the turning point that was yet to come. And as I stared at every face in the room, feeling the weight of tension and anticipation, I realized that the sequence of events about to unfold would change everything. Every word spoken by the lawyer, every silent gesture, every look that could no longer hide, was preparing the ground for the final confrontation of the truth. But the question that arose in my mind and remained uneasy was everyone ready to face the consequence of their own actions, to face the reality that I had kept silent for months, and which was now beginning to become impossible to ignore? Because I felt with every fiber of my being that the next reaction in the hall would be decisive and transformative, and that no one would leave this moment the same way they entered. The room sank into a silence so dense that I could hear every breath, every movement of a chair, every whisper contained. Mr. Whitmore's words were not aggressive, but they carried a moral force that no one could ignore. The guests, once occupied with sweets, photos, and casual conversation, now looked at Jessica with eyes of astonishment, of silent disapproval. I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something in the air, an invisible but powerful change, as if the weight of months of humiliation was finally beginning to become visible to all. A couple of neighbors, old friends of the family, exchanged glances and discreetly moved away from her, as if they no longer wanted to have any contact with the hypocrisy that was beginning to reveal itself. The aunt who heard the initial whisper, the one who had always kept a certain distance, now murmured, almost to herself, but audible enough for anyone who would listen. He was humiliated for months. Jessica, noticing the change in weather, tried to laugh, trying to cover up the tension that was beginning to take over her body and her posture. "Guys, don't overdo it. He's just a sick old man," he said. But the sentence sounded weak, without conviction, and everyone listened. The weight fell on her like a block of concrete. The silence that once hung over me now turned against those who thought they had control. I sat there watching, taking a deep breath, feeling every gaze fix on her, her every gesture being interpreted by those who were finally beginning to realize the dimension of the truth. There was a silent justice in the air, a sense that everything I had endured in silence, all the months of pain and embarrassment, was finally being acknowledged, even without me having to raise my voice. As Jessica tried to compose herself, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation run through my body. Silence had turned into a moral sentence. There was no room for excuses, nor for rehearsed gestures. The truth was in front of everyone, clear and implacable, revealing the contrast between my patience and dignity and the coldness she showed over the months. And at that moment, I realized something profound. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any scream, and it is precisely this silence, loaded with truth, that creates real changes, that transforms looks and confronts hearts. I felt such an intense emotion that for a moment my eyes filled with tears, but I didn't want anyone to see it. I took a deep breath and looked at Emily, who was still holding my hand, and I felt that that gesture of connection gave me the strength to continue. I thought clearly. Every word I kept, every tear I contained, every smile I kept silent, all this prepared the ground for this moment. And if you're there listening to me, realizing the strength that small, silent actions can have, stay with me until the end, because what comes next will change everything, and maybe make you think about your own life in a way you never imagined. As I watched Jessica's expression, I noticed the change in her eyes. There was surprise, tension, and a certain subtle fear, as if she had finally felt the weight of what she had caused. The gazes of family and friends were fixed on her, charged with silent judgment, and I knew that this realization would not be forgotten anytime soon. The energy in the hall had changed, and even without raising my voice, I felt that moral justice was beginning to manifest itself before everyone. The contrast was striking. Me, sitting, marked by pain, tumor, contempt, but whole, and she standing, trying to maintain the appearance of control, but visibly uncomfortable, now carrying the weight of what she had previously tried to ignore or minimize. Every gesture, every word, every silent look of approval or reproach built a picture of reality that was impossible to deny. And I, observing everything, felt a silent satisfaction, a deep relief, but without malice, only with the certainty that the truth always finds a way to show itself. As I breathed, the air felt heavy, loaded with expectations, and I knew that the next step would be decisive. Every month of silence, every patience, every entry in the notebook, every contained tear was about to become something palpable, real, impossible to ignore. And I realized in that instant that something greater was yet to come, something that would require courage, not only on my part, but also on the part of each person present, especially Jessica. And then I wondered, as I watched every gesture and every expression in the room, was she prepared to face the truth that was finally emerging before everyone? Because I felt silently and steadily that the sequence of events was about to reach a critical point, and that no one would leave that hall the same way they entered. There was something about to happen that would completely change everyone's perception, definitively revealing not only my patience and dignity, but also the depth of the injustice I had faced for months. As the tension mounted, I realized that every contained breath, every interrupted whisper, every stare fixed on me or her was part of a quiet preparation for the decisive moment. The strength I held inside me, even with a deformed nose, even in the face of contempt, was about to manifest itself in a way that no one could ignore. And so, sitting there, with a heavy heart and alert mind, I knew that the moment of final revelation was approaching, and that everything that would happen next would forever change the dynamics of that family, Jessica's perception, and above all, the place I held in the lives of those I loved most. Michael stood up suddenly, and I noticed the tension in his eyes before I even heard a word. He was visibly shaken. His teary eyes betrayed emotions that had been contained for a long time. Until then, silent, he took a deep breath and, in a voice that started out trembling, said something that no one expected. "This is all my fault. I saw it. I heard it. I let it happen." All eyes turned to him, and the silence in the hall became almost palpable. Then he turned slowly to Jessica, and his voice, though choked, carried firmly. "You mocked my father." He called it disgusting. It made me feel ashamed of him, and I allowed it. Each word resounded, as if it were breaking years of silence and indifference. His voice broke, and he knelt before me in the midst of the guests, a gesture of regret and recognition that seemed to transcend everything that had been said before. "Father, forgive me. I was weak." Jessica tried to interrupt, trying to regain some control, but Michael completely ignored her. He had decided to face the truth, to face what everyone tried to hide or minimize. Emily ran over to us, hugged us tightly, and I felt her little hand squeezing mine as if to say that everything was right, that we were finally together for real. The whole room began to applaud, standing, and at that moment I felt something I hadn't felt for a long time: relief and justice. The pain I carried in silence, the months of humiliation, the averted looks, Jessica's coldness, everything seemed to be recognized in such a pure way that tears began to form in my eyes. As I looked at Michael on his knees, feeling the weight of his confession, I realized how some memories have the strength to mark a lifetime. Simple moments, words spoken or not, small gestures, can transform the perception of everything and everyone around us. And for a moment, I closed my eyes and thought, how many times in life do we keep silent, observe, suffer alone, and believe that no one will ever see our struggle? But suddenly, someone stands up and gives voice to this silent truth. It is impressive the power that a memory, a courage, a gesture of love can have on the present and even on the future. If you have a memory that has always marked your life, that has moved you in a deep way, look for it now in your memory chest. And, if you feel like it, share in the comments something special that you have experienced or heard about something similar, because these stories connect us in a unique way. As Michael remained on his knees, I realized that silent confession transformed everything around me. The coolness that Jessica tried to maintain began to unravel. Her countenance carried the surprise and tension of someone who never expected to face her own truth in front of everyone. The weight of the silence she had imposed on me in recent months finally fell on her, and I felt silently and firmly that the justice I had waited for so long was coming to fruition, not through screaming or humiliation, but through the courage of those who had a voice to recognize the mistake. Emily still held my hand, her eyes shining, and in that instant I realized that every suppressed smile, every silent tear, every moment of patience, every page of my notebook written in the dark, had set the stage for that emotional explosion. Everything I had carried for months was finally being recognized, validated, and I felt that the truth, inescapably, was beginning to reverse all the looks of contempt that surrounded me. The energy in the hall changed completely, and I could tell that something even bigger was about to happen, something that would go beyond Michael's words, beyond regret, beyond Jessica's coldness. As I watched everyone's eyes, I noticed the transformation that was taking place in front of me. Old neighbors, family members, some friends, all absorbed the strength of that moment. It was as if the story I had quietly carried had taken on a life of its own, filling the space with fairness and recognition. The tension that had hung in the air before Michael's speech now turned into silent anticipation, as if everyone was about to witness the outcome of years of pain, patience, and dignity. And I, sitting there still with my heart racing, felt that every contained breath, every silent gaze, and every saved gesture was about to culminate in something even deeper. Michael's confession not only revealed repentance, but also paved the way for the truth I had carried for months to fully manifest itself, showing that a man's strength is not measured by appearance, but by the courage to stand upright and to demand respect, even when everyone expects him to submit to humiliation. As the room absorbed every detail of the scene, I realized that Jessica could no longer hide the impact of the truth. The tension in his body, the surprise, the impossibility of disguising his own guilt, everything became visible. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, the certainty that my patience, my silent smile, and my self-respect were about to produce an effect that would forever change the perception of everyone around me. And as Michael stood up, still teary-eyed, and Emily kept hugging both of us, I realized something bigger was about to happen. A sequence of events that would not be forgotten, that would bring consequences and profound lessons for those who tried to diminish me, was about to unfold. The question that arose in my mind was clear and unsettling. Was everyone really prepared to face the next stage of this truth, the consequence of what had accumulated in silence for so many months? Because I knew, with every fiber of my body and every memory of my past, that the final revelation was about to inevitably manifest, and no one will come out of this moment the same way they entered. Jessica seemed to believe that she still had some control over the situation. He pulled Michael by the arm, his voice trembling, almost begging, "Are you going to leave me because of this?" But he did not answer, not a word. He just walked with me and Emily out of the room, keeping his steady pace. And I felt the weight of years of silence being turned into silent justice. Emily held my hand, and her trust was my shield. Every step we took out of the room seemed to remove not only the physical distance, but all the tension, all the humiliation I had carried over the past few months. Inside the hall, the atmosphere has completely changed. The gazes that had previously been averted were now fixed on Jessica. Some relatives simply avoided looking at her, unable to ignore the coldness and cruelty she had shown for so long. Others did not hesitate to speak openly. "How did you have the courage to treat him like that?" Whispers that became audible, firmness in reproach that she could no longer conceal. The friend she had whispered to earlier, an accomplice in so many small comments and gestures of contempt, turned her face and walked away discreetly, avoiding any link with the newly revealed hypocrisy. A close cousin, his voice low but full of conviction, said something that seemed to resonate throughout the room. His face may have deformed, but his heart rotted. That phrase struck Jessica in a way I had never seen. She sat alone, eyes downcast, hands clasped on her lap, and for the first time I realized that the shame that she had previously felt only the old man in front of her now hit her. For the first time, she was the target of the public consciousness, not me. Every gesture of hers, every attempt to justify herself seemed to have no effect. As I walked down the hallway holding Emily, I realized how quiet justice can manifest itself in unexpected ways. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to humiliate anyone. And yet the truth found its way. All the months of patience, all the smiles kept silent, all the dignity cultivated in the midst of pain were now producing concrete effects. And there, between the coming and going of the salon and the safe embrace of my granddaughter, I felt a deep satisfaction, that feeling that life, even if slow, always finds a way to balance injustices. As I walked away, I thought about how the humiliation that had once hung over me now turned against those who imposed it. The silent irony was clear. Me, with my face scarred, but whole, with patience and history intact. She, with an impeccable appearance, but with an exposed, vulnerable and embarrassed heart. Every gesture that life had prepared so far seemed to have reached its culmination. And even though there were still many steps to go, that reversal of positions, that subtle justice, was enough for me to feel that all the suffering endured had not been in vain. As I walked with Emily, I realized that the most important moments in life are often not announced. They don't have applause or immediate prominence. They emerge discreetly, like a silent current that reveals itself at the right moment. Every word from Michael, every look of recognition from those present, every gesture of distancing or reproach towards Jessica was like a wave that little by little transformed everyone's perception, including my own, about the patience I had carried for so long. The corridor out of the hall seemed endless, but with each step I felt that we were approaching something greater, something that could not yet be fully seen or understood. The sense of anticipation mingled with the reassurance of knowing that the truth was unfolding in a natural way, that my dignity, kept intact for months, would finally be recognized by all those who needed to see. And as Emily squeezed my hand, I felt that every silent gesture of mine up to that moment, every contained tear, every smile maintained, was about to culminate in something even more impactful. And as I felt strengthened by my granddaughter's innocence and trust, a question began to form in my mind. How far can silent justice go before it becomes visible to all? I felt that we were on the verge of something that would completely change the dynamics of the family, that would transform the perception of each person present, and that the sequence of events that would follow would no longer allow hypocrisy or coldness to be ignored. There was a palpable sense in the air that something greater was yet to come, and that no one, not Jessica, not anyone else, could escape the impact that the soon-to-be-revealed truth would have on every heart in that room. As we walked silently down the hallway, I realized that this moment, Jessica's unexpected abandonment, the shame that finally hit her, was just the beginning of a series of events that would expose the essence of each person present. And I knew with quiet clarity that the final sequence of this story would reveal far more than anyone could have anticipated, and that my patience, my courage, and my dignity would play a central role in the approaching conclusion. Michael parked the car in front of my house, but before I could get out, he turned to me with those eyes still teary, full of suppressed emotion, and said, "Will you let me take you there?" I nodded, and we settled. In the back seat, Emily slept soundly on my lap, the smell of her hair mixed with the perfume she wore, bringing me a peace I hadn't felt in months. It was amazing how the presence of a child could calm so much, as if all the weight of the day, of months of silent pain, could be relieved in that instant. I stroked her head, taking a deep breath, feeling the soft texture of her hair and the warmth of her body against mine, and I realized that despite the tumor, the wounds, and the deformity, there was something more important that remained intact: the serenity of my soul. As the car slowly made its way through the illuminated streets of Asheville, Michael and I began to talk, as we hadn't in years. Those words, which came naturally, seemed to fill spaces that months of silence, indifference, and pain had left empty. He asked me, almost whispering, with shame and regret, "Father, why did you never react? Never screamed, never said anything?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror and took a deep breath. "Michael, because their shouting can't touch my peace," I replied. Each word came out with the calm that I felt, charged with a serenity that he still could not fully understand. He began to cry, those silent tears that carry regret, and asked for another chance, an opportunity to redeem himself, to be better, to take care of me as I always took care of him. I felt his heart open before me. I felt the sincerity in his words and posture. And then, in a serene voice, he said, "Caring is not doing it for me. Caring is doing differently when life tests you. Every gesture, every decision, every attitude must be guided by integrity, respect, kindness. It is easy to do what is convenient, easy to get away, easy to hide, but true care reveals itself when no one is looking, when life tests your patience and your character." Michael absorbed every word, shaking his head, and I realized that that moment of connection, however silent, was more valuable than any speech, any judgment, any humiliation suffered. The car drove through the quiet streets, and I held Emily in my arms, watching her serene sleep and feeling that that moment, so simple, so small, carried all the essence of a reconciliation that could not be bought or forced. Michael began to speak, still in a choked voice. "Dad, I want to learn how to do it right. I want to be worthy of what you have done for me, of what you are." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight and lightness simultaneously. "So, start now, Michael. Don't expect applause, don't expect recognition. Start by doing it differently, even when no one is looking. Do it for love, for silent justice, for the respect you owe to the people you love." As we spoke, I realized that all the embarrassment, all the shame, all the contempt of Jessica and so many others that night was now behind her. The silence of the car was transformed into dialogue, connection, learning. Emily, still asleep, was breathing easy, and I felt that every gesture of mine, every word spoken at that moment, had more power than months of argument, humiliation, or tears. The night outside was calm, the lights of the houses passing softly through the window, and I realized that even with the tumor, with the deformity, I had never felt so clean inside as I did that night. The feeling was that everything I had endured, every moment of patience, every silent tear, every smile I had, now culminated in a gift, the possibility of rebuilding the relationship with my son and reaffirming my place in my family's life. Michael took a deep breath, his face still marked by tears, and said, "Dad, I promise I'll do it differently. I want to be dignified. I want to care. I want to protect. I want to be present." I looked at him, felt his sincere regret, and put my hand on his shoulder. "Michael, caring is not just doing for the other. Caring is learning to act when life challenges you, when difficult situations arise, when patience is tested. Caring is never repeating the mistakes that have already hurt those we love." He nodded, still moved, and I realized that that moment of silence and dialogue was worth more than any confrontation, more than any speech in the hall. The car moved slowly, and I felt that the night still held surprises, but that at that moment the connection with my son and the presence of Emily gave me the strength to face what was yet to come. Every word we exchanged, every silent gesture of understanding, every contained embrace was building a bridge that brought us closer to something greater, to a deep reconciliation that no one else could interrupt. Michael, still trembling, looked at me and said, "Dad, thank you. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I failed." I smiled, feeling that every tear, every silent pain, every moment of patience had finally found meaning. "Michael, never give up on what is just and right. Never underestimate the power of silence combined with patience. This is how dignity is maintained, even in the face of everything." And as I watched Emily sleep, the warmth of her body against mine, her breathing calm, I realized that that night, that conversation in the back seat of the car, would be remembered forever. It was more than reconciliation. It was learning. It was silent justice. It was the confirmation that even marked by tumor and pain, he could still influence, teach, and protect with dignity. And at the same time, I felt that something was still to happen, something that would definitively complete the entire sequence of justice that had begun that night. As the car drove through the quiet streets of Asheville, a question began to form in my mind, unsettling and loaded with expectation. Is everyone really prepared to face the outcome that is yet to come? Because I felt, with every fiber of my body, that the sequence of events, the truth exposed, the silent acknowledgement, the repentance and the reconciliation had not yet reached its culmination, and that when it did, no one would leave that moment the same way they entered. And with Emily asleep in my lap, and Michael finally understanding the weight of what it meant to act with dignity, I realized that the true test of life was yet to come, silent, inevitable, and transformative. Days after the party, I arranged a lunch in the park with Mr. Charles Whitmore. The Asheville sun was soft that evening, and the smell of flowers in the flower beds seemed more intense, almost as if the city was in tune with the importance of this moment. I took with me a thick envelope with the most important documents I had kept in recent months. The will, the planned donations, letters and records that I carefully organized, each page reflecting silent, prudent, and intentful decisions. I sat at the wooden table in the park, watching children running and birds flying, and I felt a strange lightness. I would finally have the opportunity to transform all the suffering I had endured into something concrete, something that would benefit those who really deserved it. Charles approached, elegant as always, but with that watchful eye that only a good lawyer and long-time friend can have. He opened the envelope, flipped through the documents, and nodded with silent approval, acknowledging the organization and clarity of my decisions. I spoke calmly, as if talking to someone who really understood the value of patience and justice. "Charles, the time has come to make everything official. It's not revenge, it's just silent justice. She took my Sundays away, but I can still give my granddaughter a better Monday." He smiled, recognizing the deep meaning of my words, and replied, "Thomas, your wisdom is impressive. The way he turned pain and frustration into something that protects the family and ensures Emily's future is admirable." As Charles reviewed each document, I explained my decisions in detail. I removed Jessica from all legal records, ensuring that she no longer had influence over anything involving Emily's education and assets. The will was clear. The house would pass to Emily, with a clause that guaranteed my living for life and preserved the use of the assets for her education. Every word, every line reflected the patience and serenity I maintained during months of humiliation. There was no hurry. There was no exaggerated rancor. Everything was calculated, fair, and aimed at protecting those who really deserved it. As I watched Charles at work, I again felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always believed that justice doesn't have to be noisy to be effective. The pages of the will were my response to those months of contempt, of averted looks, of spiteful comments, and, at the same time, they were my legacy of love and protection. I realized that as much as the physical pain persisted and the tumor still deformed my nose, there was something that could not be taken away from me: the ability to turn suffering into something positive, the chance to protect Emily and leave a mark of dignity that no one could erase. As we talked, I looked out over the park and watched life happening all around. Children playing, families meeting, elderly people walking with their grandchildren. Each scene reminded me that life goes on, that every choice made now has future repercussions, and that the way we deal with injustices can teach lessons that span generations. I took a deep breath, feeling that this moment, simple in appearance but profound in meaning, was becoming a definitive turning point. And it was at that moment that I thought clearly: there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because not every victory needs shouts, not every hit needs applause. Sometimes the quietest gesture, done with wisdom and patience, has the power to change everything, to rebuild relationships and protect those who really matter. Charles looked at me, nodded once more, and said that everything was ready to be made official. I felt a sense of lightness that I hadn't felt in a long time. That lunch in the park, with the clear sky over our heads and the tranquility all around, symbolized more than just the delivery of documents. It was the closing of a chapter, the transformation of suffering into protection, from pain to legacy. And at the same time, I knew that there were still reactions to come, that I still needed to observe how Jessica would react when she realized the extent of my decisions, and that the next few days would reveal inevitable consequences. As I folded the envelope with the documents, I realized the difference between screaming to be heard and acting silently to protect. Every line written, every decision made, reflected the respect I still had for my family, for life, and for myself. There was a delicate justice that needed no direct confrontation to be felt, and I felt that Emily, in particular, would be the purest beneficiary of this decision. Every time I thought about her, the smile came back, even with the pain I still felt on my face and in the memory of the last few months. Charles closed the envelope and said, "Thomas, you have turned what could have been just suffering into an opportunity to teach and protect. It is rare to find this combination of patience and firmness. I just smiled, feeling that everything I had endured was finally coming to fruition into something tangible. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about protecting possessions, but about reaffirming values, love, and respect, elements that Jessica never valued, but that I could now preserve for my granddaughter. As we left the park, I felt that each step was loaded with meaning. The gentle breeze touched my face, and for the first time in months, I felt that the peace I had cultivated within was beginning to be reflected in the world around me. Emily was running next to Michael, laughing, and I felt a mixture of joy and relief. The envelope of documents represented more than legal decisions. It was the realization of everything I believed in: patience, silent love, and justice that does not scream but makes itself felt. And at the same time, I realized that the story wasn't over yet. Jessica would certainly react when she discovered the extent of the changes, and I knew that the moment when she would realize her position, isolated and out of control, was about to come. I asked myself, as I watched the city move around us, is it prepared to face the consequences of its own actions? Because I felt, with every fiber of my being, that the sequence of events had not yet come to an end, and that the final outcome, loaded with justice and recognition, was still inevitably approaching, and I was ready for him, with the serenity of someone who knows that patience and dignity always find a way. I accepted the invitation of a local photographer who sought me out to participate in a project called Real Faces. At first I hesitated. My face, marked by wound and deformity, was something I always preferred to hide, even from myself. But something in that proposal aroused curiosity. The idea of showing the reality of elderly people who carry their own visible battles, without makeup, without cover-ups, just the raw and honest truth. I took a deep breath and told myself that maybe it was time to turn the pain into something that could be useful, that could inspire others who, like me, faced judgmental looks and silent challenges. On the day of the rehearsal, I arrived at the studio with Emily by my side. She insisted on accompanying me, carrying that pure energy that always gave me courage. The photographer guided me patiently, asking me to look directly into the lens, to allow my face to tell the story that words often cannot express. Each click seemed to capture not only the sore in his nose, but the entire story he carried: the suppressed tears, the silent smiles, the days of patience and dignity, the moments of abandonment, as well as reconciliation. As I watched the computer screen, I saw my portrait appear in great definition. My injured nose, the firm and penetrating eyes, the expression of someone who went through pain and did not let himself be broken. I felt a mixture of shame and pride, as if every detail, every scar, every shadow was a silent proof of everything I endured and everything I achieved without having to humiliate anyone. And it was at that moment that I realized pain can be transformed into something that inspires respect, courage, and reflection. If you are there, thinking that your own marks or wounds are weaknesses, I want you to remember it is precisely in them that your strength lies. A few days later, the portrait was exhibited at the city's public library in an exhibition that told stories of elderly people facing visible illnesses. The caption under my photo read, "I'm not the one who got ugly, I'm the one who stood up." That touched me deeply. For years I had been evaluated by my appearance, by the discomfort that my face caused, by the deformity that marked me physically. But now someone transformed my story into public recognition, in a silent and dignified way. I felt that finally, something that had once been a source of shame had become a source of pride. On the day of Emily's school visit, she walked into the library with her classmates, and pointing to my picture said excitedly, "That's my grandfather. He's the strongest man I know." I heard those words from afar, without introducing myself, just observing. Every sentence that came out of Emily's mouth carried a weight greater than any compliment I could receive in years of quiet patience. There was my granddaughter in front of all her colleagues, recognizing my strength, my dignity, and my silent love, without needing justifications, without having to explain months of suffering. As I stood in the corner of the exhibition room, observing the children's interaction with the portrait, I realized something profound. Life often puts us in situations of pain and rejection, but the way we choose to deal with it defines not only who we are, but the legacy we leave. Every curious look from the children, every admiring comment, every hesitant step in front of the portrait was a reminder that my story, even though it was marked by deformity and tumor, could inspire, teach, and reconnect people with values that are easily lost: respect, patience, dignity, and unconditional love. And there, in silence, watching my granddaughter and her colleagues, I realized that being truly seen does not depend only on the acceptance of others, but on the courage to remain whole in the face of adversity. I could have hidden. I could have kept my face covered, my days confined to silence, but I decided to show my truth. And Emily's reaction, the clarity in her eyes, and the attention my gestures and my face received, showed that every moment of patience, every tear suppressed, every smile kept, had been worth it. I then felt a sense of quiet accomplishment that I never imagined I would achieve. The portrait was not just my image. It was the materialization of everything I faced, of every injustice, of every moment in which I smiled, even though I felt pain. And the way Emily recognized him, how she pointed to me proudly and explained the story of the strong grandfather, showed that what we carry internally, even when invisible to many, can become a source of learning and inspiration for others. As I watched the movement around, I felt a quiet connection with each person present. There were looks of curiosity, some of admiration, others of deep reflection. I realized that the impact of the portrait was not restricted to my personal story, but touched hearts that might never have reflected on the importance of patience, quiet courage, and dignity in the face of adversity. Each breath in that space seemed to carry some of the weight I had carried for months, and the way my presence, even physically absent from direct interaction, influenced everyone's perception, brought me a sense of completeness that few experiences provide. As I watched, I realized that the real victory was not in immediate recognition, but in the ability to turn pain into legacy. The portrait, the silence I maintained, the patience in the face of cruelty and rejection, all combined to show that being whole and resilient is worth much more than any physical appearance. And there, seeing Emily pointing at me proudly, I realized that my silent battles had borne fruit that surpassed what I could have hoped for. And even without introducing myself, even though I remained physically distant from the group, I felt that I was being seen in a complete way, not just as a man with a deformed nose, but as someone who faced pain, preserved dignity, and kept love for his family intact. And in that moment I realized that life has silent ways of recognizing courage. The portrait not only showed my face, but told a whole story of perseverance, patience, and integrity that no one could erase. As Emily explained to her colleagues the strength of her grandfather, who remained by her side, I realized that there was still more to come. The exposure, the reaction of the people, and the way my story was being recognized were only part of something bigger, a sequence of events that would still reveal profound transformations in the perception of all those who once doubted my dignity or disrespected my presence. And as I stood there silently, watching the life around me and my proud granddaughter, a question formed in my mind. Was everyone prepared to see not just the physical portrait, but the full truth that my story carries? Because I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the final moment of the sequence of justice, recognition, and transformation was yet to come, and that it would bring out something that no one in that hall or that library could ignore, forever transforming the perception of who I really am. While organizing my things at home, I ended up finding a letter I wrote weeks before the party. It was addressed to Jessica, but I never delivered it. In the lines I carefully traced in my handwriting, trembling with time, I tried to explain everything. The pain I felt at being ignored, the silent humiliation she imposed, the weight of every averted look, every cold, biting comment. I wrote about the tumor, about the wound that deformed my nose, but also about the much bigger wound that was her indifference. Every word was charged with contained emotion, with silent resentment, with deep sadness. Reviewing the letter, I felt the tightness in my chest again, but I also realized the strength that was in each sentence, not to hurt, but to reveal the truth I carried, the truth that no one seemed to see. I held the letter in my hands for a few minutes, observing every word, every line, every emotion that had been carefully transcribed. I remembered the coldness with which Jessica treated me, how she looked away, how she tried to minimize my presence, as if I were a nuisance that needed to be ignored. And then I felt something change inside me. I realized that despite all the suffering, despite the physical pain and shame I had carried for so long, I had already found my own righteousness. I no longer needed anyone to acknowledge my pain, because the right people had already seen it, had already understood it, and had already reacted according to the truth. Carefully, I began to tear the letter into thin strips, as if each cut piece represented a fragment of pain that I finally let go. Every bit that fell into the trash seemed to ease the heaviness on my chest, as if I was releasing not only words, but also months of silent suffering, frustrated expectations, and pent-up bitterness. I took a deep breath and felt a clarity that I hadn't felt in a long time. There was power in silence, power in no longer having to explain yourself, in not depending on the approval or understanding of those who don't deserve it. As I looked at the pieces of paper scattered at the bottom of the trash can, a phrase echoed inside me, like a mantra that summed up the entire path I had traveled. What is not said also has power. It was a quiet, subtle, but profound victory. I didn't have to confront Jessica. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to seek revenge. What I had done up to that point, to maintain my dignity, to protect my granddaughter, to organize the documents, to expose the truth through gestures and attitudes, was enough. The letter, with all the words I never delivered, now became a symbol of an inner strength that no one could take away from me. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the late afternoon sun illuminate the garden. The wind gently swayed the leaves of the trees, and I felt that I had finally found a balance between the pain I experienced and the serenity I cultivated. Every contained tear, every silent smile, every gesture of patience, all of this had prepared me for that moment of inner peace. I realized that the real victory was not in convincing anyone of my pain, but in keeping my integrity, my dignity, and my love intact, even in the face of rejection and contempt. As I reflected, I remembered Emily, how she hugged me at the party, how she ran to see me, how she recognized my strength without needing long explanations or complicated words. That memory brought me a sense of fullness, that everything I had done up to that moment had not been in vain. Every silent gesture, every calculated decision, every moment of patience and dignity had produced an effect that I could never have imagined when I wrote that letter. I looked again at the pieces of paper in the trash can and felt a strange warmth in my chest. It was not anger, no sadness, but a mixture of relief, recognition, and freedom. The letter no longer needed to exist. The words that were never delivered now were just inner reminders of who I am and what I faced. The wound on my nose was still there. The visible deformity still existed, but the emotional weight I had carried for months was diminishing, slowly disappearing, as if each torn piece of paper took away a part of the suffering. And there, in silence, I realized something fundamental. Many times we expect the world to recognize our pain, that those who have hurt us understand the impact of their actions. But true strength lies in maintaining integrity, in acting patiently, in choosing where to invest our energy. I had waited for the right moment, cultivated my patience, and was finally reaping the rewards of my quiet resistance. The torn letter was a testimony that I no longer needed to explain. I no longer needed to justify anything. As I took a deep breath, feeling the wind touch my face and watching Emily playing in the yard, I realized that I had come full circle. The letter, which once represented an attempt at communication and perhaps even emotional relief, was now no longer useful. What needed to be said had already been demonstrated through actions, decisions, and behaviors that made clear my worth, my dignity, and my love for my family. And in a way, the silence I maintained, now transformed into an absence of need for explanation, became the greatest victory I could win. And as I collected the final pieces of the letter and threw them in the trash, I felt a quiet, deep, comforting peace. I realized that life, even marked by pain, rejection, and humiliation, still offers opportunities for resignification. The undelivered letter became a symbol not of failure, but of inner strength, of silent victory, and emotional freedom. I no longer needed to seek external validation. My peace was assured, and my dignity was intact. But even with this sense of completeness, I realized that something still hovered on the horizon. Jessica, when she became aware of the legal decisions and the sequence of events that followed the party, would have to face her own consequences, her own perception of failure and shame. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this moment, inevitable and silent, would still change the dynamics of the family definitively. As I sat back in my seat, taking a deep breath and watching the sun set, a question began to form in my mind. Is she really prepared to face the consequences of her actions, to face the truth honestly, or is she still left with resistance and surprise in the face of the silent justice we have built? Because I felt, with absolute clarity, that the last phase of this story was about to unfold, and that no one would leave the same way they entered, including Jessica. And as I watched the garden lit up by the last rays of sunshine, I realized that the final sequence of this story would go beyond words or documents. It would touch hearts, expose truths, and forever transform the perception of each person involved. I invited Emily to afternoon tea on the porch, and she arrived with a small cake she had made herself proudly, with that smile that only children can carry so genuinely. The sweet aroma spread through the air, mingling with the smell of the flowers in the garden, and I felt a tranquility I hadn't experienced in a long time. We sat at the old wooden table, and while she carefully cut slices of the cake, we started talking about school, art, small everyday events, and memories of grandmother. Every word that came out of Emily's mouth carried the pure sincerity of someone who had not yet learned to judge by appearance, and I felt my heart fill with a mixture of love, relief, and hope. As we talked, Emily gently touched my nose, running her fingers over the scarred, sensitive skin. There was no disgust, no surprise, just a curious gesture full of affection. "Grandpa, I don't care what I see," she said, looking me in the eyes with a seriousness that surprised even me. At that moment I felt my tears come up discreetly. Discreetly because I didn't want Emily to notice, but I couldn't contain the excitement of finally being accepted for who I am, not for the looks, but for the essence. For the first time in a long time I felt like I belonged, truly seen and loved, without having to hide anything. As the girl bit into the cake and told about what she learned in school, I realized how simple moments can carry immense emotional strength. Life had put me in situations of pain, rejection, and humiliation. But in that instant, with Emily by my side, feeling the bond that never broke, I realized that everything I had endured was now turning into something palpable: genuine love, true connection, and emotional freedom. Her every gesture reminded me that what really matters is not the appearance, but the truth we carry within us. Emily looked at the old notebook I kept hidden on my desk and, with a twinkle in her eye, said, "Grandpa, I want to turn your notebook into a book. I want people to know your story." I felt a lump in my throat, but I smiled. "You can write everything," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Just don't lie. Say I bled, but I never got dirty." Each word came out loaded with dignity and honesty, reflecting everything I learned throughout my life, everything I endured in silence, and that was finally beginning to be recognized. As Emily began to flip through the notebook, reading passages here and there, I felt a silent but intense emotion. Every line she read, every question she asked, every curious gesture reminded me that patience, resilience, and the courage to maintain dignity in the face of injustice are not in vain. Even with my face scarred by the tumor, even with the months of contempt and rejection, I had built something that transcended physical appearance, a legacy of integrity, love, and quiet strength, ready to be shared with the world. As the afternoon wore on, I felt that this conversation, that simple tea on the porch, represented something much greater than a meal or an exchange of words. It was the symbol that, even in the face of all adversity, it was still possible to rebuild bonds, strengthen relationships, and let the truth of the heart manifest itself without fear, without haste, with love and patience. Emily, with her innocence and sensitivity, showed me that a person's worth is not in the way they are seen by others, but in the impact that their essence and actions have on those they love. As I watched Emily's small hand scroll through the pages of the notebook, remembering every story I had written in silence, I felt a mixture of nostalgia and hope. Nostalgia for the battles faced, for the moments when I thought about giving up, for the days of pain and shame. Hope, because now I could see that my story had meaning, that each act of patience and dignity had borne fruit that would continue to grow through my granddaughter and future generations. I took a deep breath and, for a moment, closed my eyes, letting the sense of belonging fill me completely. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, that my story was secure, that my legacy of patience, courage, and quiet love would be passed on in a true way. Emily would be the guardian of this history, but she would also be the living witness that even when the world judges us by what it sees, we can remain whole and steadfast, carrying dignity in every gesture, in every decision. As the afternoon wore its farewell, with the sun setting softly over the garden, I realized that this tea time with Emily was not just a family gathering. It was the confirmation that despite the suffering, deformity, humiliations, and rejection, life still offers us opportunities for deep connection, genuine love, and silent recognition. And in that instant, I realized that there was still one last step to be revealed, something that would complete the sequence of justice, dignity, and emotional freedom that had been unfolding since the early days of the wound on my nose. As I watched Emily jotting down excerpts from her notebook, trying to transform my words and experiences into something that could be shared with the world, a question began to arise in my mind. Was the final moment of the story about to reveal itself, showing definitively that dignity, patience, and true love always find a way, even in the face of the greatest adversity? Because I felt, with every fiber of my being, that the conclusion was near, and that when it came, no one, not Emily, not Jessica, not any other family member, would see the situation the same way again. The sense of quiet anticipation filled the air, and I knew that the last phase of the story would still bring its definitive lesson, forever transforming everyone's perception of courage, dignity, and unconditional love. I sit alone on the bench in the square, watching the autumn-tinged trees sway gently in the cold wind. My nose still hurts, the deformation is visible, and yet I don't feel ashamed. I take a deep breath and see children running, couples walking hand in hand, and I smile with a tranquility that I have not known for a long time. I remember every moment of the party, Emily's hug, the lawyer's words, Michael's regret, and Jessica's silent fall. Today, they go on with their lives, some more conscious, others carrying the lesson of shame, while I go on in peace, wounded on the outside, but whole on the inside. I realized that the real victory was not in humiliating, shouting, or demanding justice. It was in maintaining dignity, protecting my granddaughter, acting patiently, and waiting for the right time for the truth to be revealed. What scares others is not my appearance, but the reflection of cruelty in the face of my integrity. My daughter-in-law looked away from my deformed nose, but it was her own husband who turned away from her when he saw the truth. Life has taught me that patience, quiet love, and resilience have a strength that surpasses any gesture of contempt. I learned that we don't need to control the perception of others to be fair or upright. Our role is to act with courage, protect those we love, and let time reveal what deserves to be seen. Each wound, each scar, each contained tear has a value, because it teaches us to resist and to recognize the strength we carry within us. The learning is universal. In the face of pain, injustice, or rejection, serenity and dignity can be the greatest acts of courage. And to you who have been with me so far, I want to thank you deeply. Thank you for listening, for sharing with me this piece of my life. If you feel like this story has touched your heart, leave a like. It's like a hug that warms and supports the channel. Sign up as an invitation to come back for the next coffee and tell us in the comments which city you're watching, so we can create a community of stories and emotions together. Activate the bell so you don't miss it when the coffee is ironed again, and you can follow each report that I keep and share with affection. As I watch the leaves fall, I think about what is yet to come. Life always holds stories that teach, excite, and connect us, and don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story, and let your heart be filled with memories, learnings, and hope, because life, even with visible pain, always finds a path to truth and peace.